Okay, so I'm going to make some fog. So what I want to do is figure out which layer is which layer, and because I've got them grouped and labeled, it's easier. So I want to create some fog maybe on top of this background layer right here. So the background trees. Let me expand that a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to create some fog in this group on a layer right above these tree trunks. So you can work within a group. Just make sure you expand it. And so with this, then I'll select the tree trunk layers and I'll create a new layer above them. And I'm just going to use an airbrush tool. And this will probably be okay, this digital grainy one. I'm not going to want that real dark color. Sometimes though, if I can't see something well enough, I will use a dark color and then just change the color. So what I want to do, see, I can't see that really at all. So let me see if I make it dark. Okay, what's going on here? Oh, no. Oh, turn off the midground. This is the background. This is this layer. Oh, I am still on eraser. So it's always the simple things. Okay, so now this works, and it works okay. I want to be able to vary the size of it a little bit. So let me, no, I don't want impasto. Go here, and I'm going to pick when the palette shows up, size, and I'm going to do large to small and pretty big. And I think I'm going to do direction. So this will give it the ability to, if I go one way, see it's really nice and big. And then if I go the other way, it goes half that size. So let me move the minimum size a little bit smaller. I want the opacity more right now, so I'll move it up to 50% or so. Maybe I want pressure. So let me change this to pressure. I actually enjoy this kind of stuff that I'm going to do quite a bit. Okay, so I'll go white. I think that'll show. On the new layer, turn off a couple of these. And let me put something in the background. If you can't see it, you can't work on it. Okay, that'll, let me just pick this color so I'm not, now I'll go back and fill that layer. Okay, that works better. So what I'm doing is just drawing a squiggly line right now. Whoops. Select the right layer. And I'm not going to worry about drawing it down here because I want to kind of do it where it's easiest for me to see. So I'm going to do this meandering little thing that I'm eventually going to turn into. You can make smoke this way, or really pretty much anything. I'm going to create a new layer and do a second one. You don't have to. One layer works fine, but
Hey Don, quick
yeah.
question. Are you recording this?
Yes, I am recording it.
Right.
You can't quite see it, but here is my little recording doohickey. So 5 minutes and 18. I'm just going to let it run all class while I'm doing stuff on here, so you can see it, okay? Now I'm going to pick a different brush, and it's going to be the effects brush, and it's going to be Distorto. And I'm going to move the strength down this a lot. If I don't move the strength down, what this brush basically does is smudge things. So, see, I don't want it to smudge things, especially the background layer there. So, oh, whoops. I just wanted to undo. And I'm going to make the strength really low, maybe 10%. And I'm going to make the size, opacity pretty high, and the size bigger. Because what I want to do is just start pushing this smoky stuff around. You can see it's kind of pulling things outside of the side. I don't want it to be messing up with my trees, though. And it already did. So let me undo that a couple times. Undo. In fact, I'm going to turn off my grass layer, too. Let me it's doing something a little bit strange. It shouldn't be bringing in all of that extra. I would also do this in, depending on the mood I'm in, how much I want to move back and forth, liquefy in Photoshop. And all I'm trying to do is just get a little bit more random. You know how smoke curls on itself, and that's just generally what I'm trying to do here. That it's pulling a little bit of the color doesn't bother me too much. I could lower that, and then it probably won't pull much at all. So now, actually, this is better. It's pulling in some of the background color, so it's making the effect work a little better. And you kind of have to just decide when enough's enough, because we're going to tweak it around anyway. I got a little bit of the other color in here before I turned off the grass, but I don't think it'll matter. Okay, so I got this one where I think I like it, and you can see it right there. And it did pick up a lot of color. Let me try turning this off for this other layer. On this one, same kind of thing. This one picked up too much background color, and this one isn't. And what I did is this little button here in between preserve transparency and opacity is pick up underlying color. I should have unchecked that first, but now it's doing what I want it to do. Make it bigger. So I'm going to use this one for both, and it'll work fine. In fact, I may be able to use it for all kind of foggy layers. Okay, so let me get rid of this one. You see it's got color over it. So I'm going to use this one. I'm going to bring back in the grass, the trees, the foreground leaves. I probably want it above that. And then I'm just going to move it down obviously that's way too opaque, and I want to stretch it out a bit more. And what do I want to do with it? I want to change it. Definitely I want to change the opacity, but I might want to play with maybe overlay, not quite so much. Soft light's one that often will work for this, but that's a little too thin right now. Screen is one I'll usually use, but it looks pretty much like just the default right now. Hard light, maybe it didn't do anything. Lighten, it didn't do anything. I'm just going to leave it default, I think. But I'm going to lower the opacity a lot. I will duplicate the layer, and with the bottom one I'm going to lower its opacity quite a bit, and I'm going to blur it a lot. So effects, focus, soften, and I want to blur it quite a bit. Let me see what it looks like. Okay, so that actually starts looking better like the kind of fog I think I want to do. And I will go ahead and leave that. I'm going to take this layer and I'll use it somewhere else. So I'm going to drag it up over the mid-ground layer up here. That'll work. So my background layer then, you might want to, you adjust what you want it, the opacity and things that you want to what you want. There's no real formula, anything like that. This is probably going to look better. Yeah, if I make sure this layer is on. Or I may even make sure that this is just about the same color as the background, because this color is a little bit out of context. So the easy way to do that is I will control click on this. Now it looks strange because you can see more detail in it than the selection. The selection will create these little marching ants out as far as 50% opacity. Everything beyond that is still masked, but it's less than 50% opacity. So that's why the selection layer looks a little different. So I'm going to pick, I'm going to fill this. I'm going to do it on a different layer though. So I'm going to fill it with the background color, but a little lighter. I'm going to create a new layer. Whoops, I didn't need two. Got that selected. I'm going to turn that one off, and here's on my new layer. Now I'm going to fill it with. So now this starts looking better as far as being what, appropriate for the background. So I'm going to reselect it because I'm going to change that. That's a little too dark for me. So I'm going to go a little bit lighter. And I'm going through, honestly, a lot of this just because I'm trying to do everything I can. And that's filling in too much. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I'll create a new layer. So there's a new one. Okay, so that's still got kind of the foggy, misty thing that I want to do. I'll lower the opacity on that. I'm going to get rid of that layer. And so now my first pass of fog is done. So here's my mid-ground, and this is going to go above the mid-ground. I'm going to lower it in the picture plane a little bit, so it's not, whoops, right layer, Don, get the right layer. So it's not right over the back. In fact, I'm going to flip it. So edit, transform, flip horizontal. So it'll give me a little different kind of foggy look. Enter. And I'll probably move it down just a little bit. Now, I want the background one that I've got to be pretty much like it is as far as a little more subtle. I'm going to move it up just a little bit. So it's kind of covering all of my grass, so maybe I want it to be a little less, but I'm going to lose it. Let me see if I can screen it. Screen works better, so I can still see a little bit of the background grass. So I'll go ahead and close that up. This is definitely time when I do Shift-Control-Alt to rename it. So right now it's forest002, and I'll do Shift-Control-S. Now, Control-Alt-S. Yeah, and renamed it to 5. So now I've got 5 as a good start. I'm going to move this up a little bit. I'm going to blur it, but I think I want to keep a little bit of this feel in it. So let me blur it. Effects, focus, soften, and maybe not quite so much. Good enough. I'm going to click on that, create a new layer so I can get a little more green version of it. Pick that, get my paint can, and that will work. So Control D, lower the opacity. So that's the process. I'm not going to go through piling on a bunch more, but that's how I would go about making some fog on top of this. And then if I turn on this layer, you can still see this one might need to be a little less opaque. You do what you need to do with it to make them work. Okay, what I want to show you now, see what I got here. I'll do a Control-Alt-S. So now I want to do some God rays coming in, streaky sunlight things coming in just behind this front tree. And it'll add kind of a neat little look. You wouldn't have God rays in the same environment with all this fog, but it's a magical forest. There are unicorns in this one. So this is really easy. New layer. I select the polygonal selection tool, and on this new layer, I'm just going to start up in this corner. Now my light's coming from this side, so I want to remember that. And I'm going to start, and I'm going to come in and start creating little sun ray light bits, varying the size of them. And however many you want to do is up to you. I'm just going to do 3. So here I've got the nice little God ray things going on here. And I'm going to use an airbrush and just fill these. So go back, pick my airbrush. And I'm going to use actually a couple of airbrushes in this one. So I'll pick the digital one. I'm going to leave everything as it is there. I'm going to use this same color, and just from this one edge, I'm going to start painting these in. I'm not going to paint them all the way down. If I did, I'd probably, well, I know I would. I'd come back in and have to erase them. I'm going to add a new layer on top of this. And I like to add like some little speckles on them, like little dust motes. So I'm going to use, I think, variable splatter or pepper spray. Let me see what this looks like. That'll work. So this is on another layer on top of these. Let me hide those ones. So I made it really big so I'm not getting the sprinkly little bits on top of each other. But you can see they're coming in. And I'm going to switch, and just for fun, I'm going to use variable splatter. And I'll create a new layer for this, so in case it doesn't work like I want. And this one I'm just tapping, because the little bits that come out of it are larger. If I make it smaller, it just will clump them together. Feature, I can lower that, and they'll make them a little smaller that way. Okay, so these are ready. So what I'll do is Control D. I'll go back to the first ones, hide these top two, and here's the first ones, and I'm going to blur these a couple times to make them a lot softer. You don't want to make them so soft you can't see that they're kind of streaky, so that'll be okay. I'm going to change these, probably with screen will work a little better. Lower their opacity. You want them to show, but you don't want them to be jumping out at you too much. Now on this next layer, that's probably too many. I'm going to blur those just a little bit. So effects, soften. See, that's way too much, so I'm going to go down. So I can just start seeing a little bit of softness to them. So it looks like probably about 2 pixels is going to be good. 2 and 3. Let's preview it. .5. Okay, this though is still too crowded, too much for me, so I'm going to also change this to screen, and I'm going to lower the opacity, but I'm going to come in and erase some of these down here because that's just too much, I think. Come on. I need less opacity so I can be a little more careful with it. And mostly what I'm doing, I'm not drawing a stroke so much as tapping the brush to pick up a little bit of that now and then. And then I'll go to the top layer. I'm going to lower, change this to screen also. Actually, I'm going to leave this default. Lower the opacity because I want you to see them, but I don't want them to look like a snowstorm blizzard. And erase a few out of here. So I'm just tapping the brush as I go. I want just, and this is a little bit over the top, but I don't, that's okay. You know, I want it to look like little dust motes. I might change this layer back to default. You can see a little bit more of them. Once I get what I like, I will group these, or I will select them all, and I'm going to collapse them. And it changed color a little bit to fit this bottom one, and that's okay with me. Now, they're kind of small coming in from one side, so I'm going to transform them. And I'm just going to scale them quite a bit larger. Which also, it makes them a little steeper in angle too. So you look and you can see they're getting a little steeper as I just scale them up. It all depends on what you want to do in the real world. Remember, every day is a good day when you paint, and your trees can be happy little trees wherever you want them to be. I'm going to leave them right there, hit enter, and then I'm just going to lower the opacity a little bit. I don't want them being super obvious. So now I've added a few little God rays in the image. This is definitely the kind of stuff you don't want to do too early, because you're going to end up redoing it. And I am a little over the top with this, so I've got to take that into consideration. So now I want to show you how to use a paper texture to create some additional grass. So I'm going to create a new layer here. I'm going to select a paper texture that I know is going to work well. It's a really, really old one, but it works pretty well for this kind of stuff. It's this filigree kind of texture, so you can see this wacky little curlicue thing up there. This actually works good. To get a paper texture working, or to get a paper texture so you can actually see it and use it, you need to pick a brush that will work with that. If you think about it, any of the brushes that in traditional media would work with a texture will probably work here also. I will use this square hard pastel because I like it. You can also tell looking at other brushes. So let me look somewhere else. If the brush has if the brush has the word grainy in it, and some of them will, if I can just find one, those will also use the paper texture. So like grainy digital watercolor, it will interact with the paper texture. If it doesn't, but it's like Conti, okay, Conti would, so that will too. Soft glaze, no, that's not gonna do it. Particle, these grainy jitter sponge, that'll do it. So use tools that you would think would use a paper texture or paint on it, but then make your or pick a grainy brush. Okay, so back to chalks, pastels, that one. I'm going to use a brush pretty big, and I don't know right now brush alt. I don't know right now what it's going to look like. So the first thing I do is do a test on the image since I'm on my new. Okay, so that's actually working pretty good. I bet you now if I said, hey, go in and draw this paper texture, you could all do it, right? Of course you could. You offset it, start drawing some curlicues, and just go with it. So I'm going to go ahead and paint some of this. I will erase as it goes up too high, but this doesn't work quite right yet. So you could do it on the same layer, but I'm going to do it on a new layer. And what I'm going to do is, let's create a new layer here. So here's my new layer. what I'm going to do is come into the paper texture thing here, and I'm going to tweak the angle a little bit and move the scale up some to give me a whole kind of different look on this. And I'm going to pick a different green to go over this. That's probably not able to see too much. So you can see in the background. And so I'm layering it. You know, I'm using the same paper, but I want to make it look like it's a whole new, interesting bit of vegetation on it. So I will raise the angle more, scale. Rarely will I go above like 200% when I'm doing this kind of thing, because you just get a big jump from the front to back. So now, I guess this isn't really grass, more like blackberry bushes. May put a couple of light ones on top of it. I've got several of these, but I don't see any more in this particular library. So when you got what you want, then I'm going to come back in starting at the bottom and just clean up some of this so I don't have to look at it. You know, it's not spilling over poorly. So back to my eraser, pretty dull, soft edge one. Make sure the right layer is selected. And because I got multiple layers, I don't have to erase evenly all over the place. I can erase bits and pieces because I'm going to let this next layer do its thing on top of it. So this one, I'll get rid of this stuff. What I want it to do is start to look like it's just going back into the fog behind. And I can see a few stray ones I don't want right there. And now the last layer. You would also, when you're doing this, maybe want to try different composite methods to see if they will layer well that way. I'm not going to, I just want to show you what you can do with this. So yeah, you know, dead grass, paper textures, that kind of stuff, they'll all look pretty good. I might, it's maybe a little too contrasty, but I am in the foreground. One of the layers, maybe the far back one, probably not. I might actually soften it a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to. So when I've got them all together, Control-Alt-S, and so now I've got a new saved version. And then I'll select these ones and I will collapse them into one layer. Then I will come back in, because I'm lazy, load the selection of the tree and invert it. Nope, I didn't want to invert it. Invert it again. And now I can just clean off. I don't have to erase anything of the grass. I'll just backspace it and the tree clears off everything on top of it. There is the potential when you, and I'm just putting stuff into your mind to make you a little more crazy, duplicate it, and it will change the look of it. But you know, you could definitely, I'd probably do it on the background layer. Edit. What am I looking at? Oh, it's already there. Okay. Scale one or the other up. And it really looks brambly now, but you can start to see some duplication. So I'd go ahead and flip it. Transform, flip horizontal. And it looks more and more brambly with hardly doing anything. I may move it back over so it's not overlapping, or I just may clean it off. You can do whatever you do, but just use one, make it do more. Control-Alt-S. Any questions on those few things? Really good for Halloween, scary graveyard things, and making good for anything, okay? I don't expect many of you are going to go out and paint little trees, however you could. So just for fun, I'm going to use the image hose, and we're going to get into it pretty soon. I'm going to add a flock of birds flying through the back. Barely so you can see them. So create a new layer. Here's my new layer. I'm going to go and pick the image hose brush, which is this one that looks curiously like a hose with four-leaf clovers coming out of it. And I'll just use that one. I need the media nozzles, media panel, nozzles, and this comes default like I showed you with some birds when I painted San Francisco really quick. I'm not going to use geese because they're too big for this, but I'll just use these swallows. And I'm going to keep them in the background, so I'm going to paint them quite a bit like I did with the trees themselves in using an overlay. So I don't know what these are going to look like, but I'll just paint a stroke of them. Too many. So I'm just putting, and surprisingly enough, they're actually going back behind that one layer pretty well. Now, if I wanted them to be a little more front and center, but see, that's too much. So just go below this layer here. If I wanted them to be above this layer and still blend in, I would do the control click. Then on this layer, I would copy Control C, put it on this layer, and do a Control V. And so now what I did is I pasted this green color right on top of the birds. Now it's not much change if I don't do anything with it, but if I wanted the birds to stand out a little bit more, I would lower the opacity of that layer so the birds show up just slightly more. So there's how I would use the image hose. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. This is probably good enough for this one kind of demo. So I'll stop this one. I'll take some questions, or I'll look at what's posted up, and I'll do something else, like show you how I would paint. I could show you how I would paint a bunch of cracked lava in perspective. How cool would that be, Olivia? Okay, let me stop this.